I met my ex, Eric. Her real name is a boy's name in grad school. I was doing my PhD, she was at law school. We met at a Shabbat Hanukkah party. She was my first relationship, and I was head over heels in love with her. She was smart, she was passionate, she was funny, she was beautiful, with medium brown hair, amazing hazel eyes, skin on the darker end of incredibly white, and had amazing curves. Not too surprisingly, considering the location and context, she dressed very East Coast, classy, preppy. I don't know what to call it. I'm from Boulder, God help me. I promise that these details about her appearance are important. Looking back, I think she may have been less into me than I was into her, but she was more than loving and affectionate enough in return. Considering that most of my retrospection occurred after being dumped, I'm not sure that I can trust my analysis of the situation anyway. I digress. After a year and a half, she graduated and took a position on the opposite side of the country. Our school was in the Northeast. Her job was in LA. I asked if there weren't any closer positions. We were in the Northeast. There's no lack of law firms or whatever. And she said that she wanted this particular position with this particular mentor as part of a career trajectory that she'd been planning out for years. I asked if we could be long distance for the 2 years until I graduated. She said that she didn't think that long distance ever worked. I begged and pleaded. I would visit her every break. I would work my ass off to graduate early. I would ask my advisor if I could be remote when I wrote my dissertation, anything and everything I could think of. She turned it all down, and the most she would allow was that after I graduated, if I wanted I could move to LA, and if we were both single, we could revisit. Screw that. Even if I didn't hate LA, but I would have moved there for Eric. I was in love, but I had some self-respect. I would love to say that after that, I hit the gym, got a glow up, and started having threesomes with models every weekend. But what actually happened was that I got super depressed and lost myself in my work. I didn't date again for 3 years. After graduating, I got a postdoc at a national lab in Colorado. I'm actually from Colorado, and even though I moved there for the job specifically, it was really nice to be near my family. The love, the sunshine, and being around people who weren't all assholes all of the time really helped me recover, and I was just getting ready to dip my toes back into the dating pool. I reconnected with some friends from high school and ended up going to a punk show where a friend of a friend was playing Fun Fact. It turns out that folk punk is a thing. In between sets, we're standing in line for drinks, and this girl comes up to us and says to me, "My friend Lisa thinks you're hot." The friend in question was razor thin, like drug problem, eating disorder, or both. Skinny, it turned out to be both. Of course, had super short, bleached blonde hair. When I tell story of how we met in real life, I usually say that her hair looked like M&M's and was dressed a little over the top, punky, tight black jeans with strategic rips, a shirt that said Nazi punks F off, a leather jacket covered in patches and pins, and army boots, and had a bunch of piercings again. General details of her appearance and dress are important. She kinda looked a little like she was cosplaying a punk. More than an actual punk, if that makes sense. Especially because her look was somewhat countered by the fact that she looked like she wanted to sink into the floor from embarrassment. To be honest, I was not particularly inclined to go along with it, but earlier that day my friend John had made me promise to say yes to any girl who showed interest in me. She wasn't smoking and didn't look gross, the two exceptions I was able to squeeze out of John, so why not? I went over, we chatted a little. Our two groups ended up staying together when the next band came on so that the two of us could hang. After the show, she invited me back to her place. I told her that I wasn't that kind of gal, but that I'd love to see her again and asked to exchange phone numbers. She told me that she didn't have a phone, so I just told her the name of a nice coffee shop and 5 p.m. tomorrow. She said she was working then, but could I do 10 a.m. the next day? I said sure, fully expecting her not to show, but she did. She was even early. We ended up talking for the entirety of the day, transitioning from coffee to lunch to more coffee to a museum to dinner to a park. I didn't mean to, but I ended up telling her about Eric, and she gave me the details of her recent past. She was raised upper middle class in a well-to-do New York suburb. the oldest daughter of two very high-performing individuals who pushed her really hard as a kid. She went to an Ivy League school for undergrad, then another for med school, before having a nervous breakdown second year. She dropped out, cut off contact with her family, and moved away. She was homeless for a while, had some drug problems, and eventually drifted to Denver, where she decided to get her crap together and went to paramedic school. It was weirdly personal for a first date, but by that point we'd been together for like 8 straight hours, and I didn't mind it. At 9 p.m., she told me she had to go because she had an early shift the next day, and she had tears in her eyes because she said she so wanted to see me again, but didn't know how we'd stay in touch. I pulled out a burner phone I'd gotten her, pre-programmed with my phone number and the numbers of 2 good Korean places she'd mentioned at the concert missing Korean food. She started full-on ugly crying, and I kissed her. Anyway, after that, we started dating, and she moved in with me faster than she should have. But I was living alone, and her living situation was less than ideal. John, who had made me agree to talk to Lisa in the first place, told me half joking, half serious, that he was kinda pissed that I found a girlfriend immediately instead of having some fun, and that this was not what he had intended. Screw John. As she started to get more comfortable with our relationship and in herself, she started getting less punky, growing her hair out, no longer bleaching it, wearing less makeup, taking out some piercings, etc. I want to emphasize that at no time did I tell her to do any of these things, though I'll admit that I did find her more attractive that way, and maybe she picked up on it. I think that a big moment happened when I brought her home to Passover Seder, and she saw how completely no one cared about her look. I grew up in Boulder, one of 6 children born to a pair of old hippies. Lisa spent an enormous amount of time trying to get ready for Seder, not knowing how to dress, wanting to go full punk, then wanting to go wearing formal evening wear, vacillating and driving me crazy. She kept asking me if this or that outfit was appropriate, and I told her that my parents were hippies from Boulder, and that they wouldn't blink if she turned up naked and covered in menstrual blood as a piece of performance art. It's a sign of how stressed she was that she didn't laugh. She ended up wearing a simple black dress and no makeup, but left all of her facial piercings in and wore combat boots. I guess as a sort of compromise between her internal feeling that she needed to dress up for the holiday dinner and a sort of belligerence that she wasn't going to compromise her identity for my read projections of her family. Anyway, no one cared. When we walked in, my mom greeted her with a hug and told her how lovely she looked. In my slacks and polo shirt, I was the second most dressed up after my dad, with most of my siblings, in-laws, and nieces and nephews wearing jeans and a t-shirt. One sister-in-law was wearing an unzipped fleece over a bikini, as she'd just come from the pool, and her husband was running late with clothes for her to change into. One sister was wearing a bathrobe. When my brother came in wearing a suit, Lisa started freaking out a little until he immediately threw off his coat and pulled his shirt tails out of his pants, complaining about having to dress up to go to district court. Somehow, the absolute level of acceptance made her feel less of a need to dress to distinguish herself, I guess. I don't get it, but I'm told it's not uncommon. I'm getting to a point, which is within about a year of us dating, Lisa had gone back to med school, gained some weight, grown out her hair, and brought it back to its natural brown color, removed most of her piercings, and started dressing normally honestly. Overdressing a little, since she kept her East Coast style, though she still wore her leather jacket out most of the time. Her skin also darkened a little after she stopped pulling night shifts and started going on some more hikes. She still has naturally pale skin, but she stopped looking like a leukemia patient and even developed a bit of a tan. This description may sound a little familiar to those reading along, but I didn't really notice it at the time. Anyway, we've been dating for about 2 years, and right now we're back east for the wedding of a good friend of mine from grad school. Lisa came along as my plus one, but after a lot of discussion, she decided that this was a good opportunity to re-establish contact with her family, since I'd be there to support her and she'd have a rock-solid excuse to leave after a couple days. This is the first time she's been back since leaving, and her only contact with her family for 4 years has been postcards and a little bit of texting to coordinate this visit. There was a lot of crying, a lot of reconciliation, and her parents took me aside and told me, "Thank you for bringing our daughter back." When I had to push on to some pre-wedding stuff, the friend getting married is Indian, so there's a lot. She stayed behind for a few extra days, but promised she'd be along before the ceremony. Anyway, a couple days ago I was at one of the pre-wedding things, and I'm outside chatting with some friends, more than a little tipsy when I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turn and see Lisa, who I guess decided to surprise me. I pulled her in for a big kiss, and she was a little stiff for a moment before relaxing into it. I pulled back and asked her how things went with her parents. She looked at me in a state of shock and said, "After all this time, after that kiss, that's your question?" And she said it with a Long Island accent. My drunk ass started to realize that this is Eric. I guess in the dim lighting, in my inebriated state, and seeing her out of my peripheral vision, I figured she was Lisa. I explained the mistake and she brushed it off. We chatted about nothing in particular for a while. She seemed to really want to talk to me, but I was freaking out because I was way too drunk to handle a situation in which I kissed my ex-girlfriend. I was double freaking out because I know how hard it was for Lisa to open up to me, and I know how fraught her emotional situation was right then. And I was afraid that this betrayal would ruin everything. I excused myself fairly quickly, got back to my room, and called Lisa. I word vomited the situation out to her, and to my enormous relief, she laughed it off and gently recommended that I be a little more sparing at the bar. In fact, that was the last alcohol I've touched on this trip, aside from a little champagne at the wedding proper. In retrospect, I don't know why I didn't expect Eric to be there, since she was a pretty good friend of the bride. We were all in grad school together, including the groom and a bunch of the guests. Bride was also a lawyer like Eric had been, and that was how they knew each other. Though we also had PhDs, MDs, an architect, an MPP, a nurse practitioner. Teal Docker were a bunch of dorks. Anyway, Eric has spent the last couple of days trying to talk to me as much as she can. As far as I can tell, life is proceeding according to plan, but she's not very happy. Men in LA are selfish and superficial. She hates being so far from her family. Her amazing mentor is amazing, but also an asshole. She hates having to drive everywhere. I've been dodging her when I can, making non-committal noises when I can't. The day of the wedding today, Lisa finally arrived just a couple hours before the ceremony. I've been keeping her apprised of the situation, and her interpretation is that for Eric, I'm the one that got away, and if she'd just stayed with me, literally everything in her life would be better. Which is obviously bullshit, but even smart people can believe bullshit when they want to. For the ceremony, Lisa decided to wear a sari, as did most of the women attending me. The bride recommended a particular shop that had a lot of experience clothing white women in saris and gave everyone a bulk discount for the wedding, and she got one in an amazing green that really brought out the green in her eyes. The ceremony was great, and in the mingling afterwards, there was a moment when I came back from the bathroom and spotted Lisa from behind. I came up and slipped my arm around her waist, but then Lisa came up in front of us and she dropped her glass of champagne in shock. I looked at the woman I've got my arm around, and it was also Lisa, except that Lisa had helix piercings in, while this woman only had rings in her earlobes, or at least in her left earlobe, which was the only one I could see. Immensely confused, I withdrew my arm and then looked at Eric, and then back at Lisa. I took a few steps back. I swear to God, they looked like the same person. Normally, they probably would have looked like sisters. It was hard for me to tell when I wasn't seeing them side by side, but with identical makeup and wearing identical dresses in an identical color, they looked the exact same. I love Lisa more than life itself, but if it wasn't for the earrings, I really don't think I would have been able to tell the difference. At this point, we've attracted an audience, probably drawn by the breaking glass. I wasn't the only person who was weirded out, and a lot of phones came out. After I don't know how long, probably like 20 seconds, though it felt like approximately 3 hours, the actual wedding photographer came over no doubt drawn like a shark to the blood of good pictures. I quickly went over to Lisa and suggested that we head somewhere quiet for a moment, which we did. I started apologizing for touching my ex so closely again, but Lisa cut me off and told me that if she wasn't herself, she would have believed that I was standing there with her. She said that she had a weird, surreal moment where she felt like she was out of her body, or maybe she was dreaming. But then she snorted and kissed me and told me to be careful not to get any goatee hairs in my mouth. When I protested that she was obviously the good twin, she gave me a wicked grin and told me that she'd have to work on convincing me otherwise. We went back to the main area, and I resolved not to break physical contact with Lisa for the rest of the trip. I haven't seen Eric again since. That was a few hours ago. We're back in our room, and Lisa put in the effort to make sure I understand how thoroughly evil she is. But I can't sleep and just had to write this all down to try and order things out in my own head. I'm sorry if all the background I gave about Lisa was unnecessary. I guess I was just trying to explain that when I started seeing her, she looked nothing like Eric, and that the change was so gradual that I didn't notice. I'm also really nervous that Lisa actually was hurt by me being with Eric and is just putting on a good face. Anyway, we're here for 2 more full days, and I've decided that I'm going to continue the whole don't leave physical contact with Lisa thing until we're on the plane. I was at a wedding where I had just discovered that my ex Eric and my girlfriend Lisa look exactly alike. Also that I'm apparently the one who got away from my ex and that everything in her life would be perfect if she'd stayed with me. Because I'm magical and can completely fix people's lives. That was yesterday. When I woke up this morning, I found Lisa on her laptop looking through her Instagram account, which is weird because I thought she didn't have any social media, which she still doesn't. She was looking through Eric's account. A lot of the pictures were obviously in LA, pausing every few moments to look at some picture or another extra closely and say weird. I came up behind her and wrapped my arms around her and said, "Before I kiss you, can I confirm your name?" "It's Eric, of course," she responded with a fake Long Island accent, which was way heavier than Eric's real one. I told her that if that was the case, then I'd just have to tickle her instead, and things almost got R-rated until she reminded me that we were supposed to be at a friend brunch in half an hour, adding, "And while I know that 29 minutes and 45 seconds is enough time for you to get ready, I don't want to shower again." Have I mentioned how much I love her? Still, I was happy that she was still in good spirits, even if I didn't like that she was cyber-stalking my ex. All things considered, though, I decided not to say anything. Anyway, in keeping with my earlier promise to myself, we went down to brunch arm in arm. I was wearing what East Coasters called business casual, and Lisa was wearing a sky blue sundress. The brunch was pretty small, so we were finally able to come up to Raj and Padma to congratulate them. Lisa was a little exasperated when I literally refused to let go of her and managed to negotiate me down to just not leaving her side. It was kind of fun to catch up with some folks that I hadn't yet had an opportunity to see, but we got a lot of side-eye, and everyone studiously avoided discussing last night, except for one of the bride's friends asking me, "Whatever happened between you and Eric, anyway?" I answered, "Just the two-body problem," and she nodded before giving Lisa a not very subtle up and down. This was the closest anyone came to really talking to her. Surprisingly, Eric wasn't present. I didn't want to ask, but someone mentioned in an overly casual way that she'd had a little work emergency and would be running late while she handled it. We all sat down. There were several speeches, too many of which used the term irreplaceable while staring directly at me, and we started eating. Eric showed up about 20 minutes into the food, in a sky blue sundress. Now, they weren't exactly the same dress like last night, and Eric was wearing low heels to Lisa's flats, but aside from that, the entire room froze, and by sheer coincidence, the empty seat had ended up next to Lisa. Apparently, no one had thought through the implications of this. What should have happened was for someone to quietly get up and sit by Lisa, opening a seat somewhere else. What actually happened was that there was about 15 seconds of total silence before Eric walked over and sat next to Lisa. Everyone continued to stare until the best man got up and gave another speech praising the couple. Thank God. It was also around this time that I started feeling kinda shitty. I'm pretty sure that I ruined Raj and Padma's wedding a little bit for the next few years at least. This'll be the time where David replaced Eric with a creepy clone instead of the time Raj and Padma had an awesome wedding. After the speech, conversation haltingly resumed. Lisa, for her part, started talking to Eric mostly since no one else would talk to her. Eric started incredibly stiff but loosened up surprisingly quickly. I think that she was expecting Lisa to be gloaty or possessive, but she was just friendly, asking about LA and being a lawyer and bringing up some sort of Westchester County-Nassau County rivalry that I didn't understand. Shockingly, Lisa even started asking about what I'd been like in grad school. More shockingly, Eric told her. And then they started talking about their experiences with me as a boyfriend. The whole time, I was staring at them along with about half of the other guests. It was eerie. Their mannerisms were even creepily similar. As they spoke, a Westchester wine completely different from a Long Island wine, I'm assured, started to enter Lisa's voice. When brunch was over, Lisa kissed Eric's cheek goodbye. And no, before any of you go there, nothing like that happened. I'm just trying to get across how friendly Lisa was with Eric by the end of the meal. We had a free afternoon before a post-wedding event around dinner time, so we went back to our room. The wedding is at a resort in the Catskills at the end of the season, so there isn't a crazy amount to do aside from hike around or use the pool. It was when we got back to our room that things got weirder. We fell into bed and started getting undressed, and Lisa put on her too strong Long Island accent and said, "Aren't you glad you ditched that replacement, bitch?" I was completely taken aback. I don't remember exactly what I said, but it was probably something like, "What are you talking about? I swear you're not a replacement. And remember how different you looked when we first met?" She gave a mean little laugh and responded, still in the accent, "Don't worry, I'm sure that bitch is okay with this." She gave me a very pointed look, and so it went. She kept in character the entire time, talking about how she never stopped loving me, heaping abuse on my little replacement hamster, etc. I kept pretty much silent. It was weird, but, still sex with my girlfriend, and she was clearly getting off on it really hard, so I went with it. After she showered, she dropped character and spoke like she'd been out at the pool for a couple hours and asked if I'd done anything while she was out. I said that no, I just hung out in the room and napped a little, which was apparently the right answer because she gave me a quick kiss. We then went on a little hike, and the evening ceremony and dinner were uneventful. Lisa and Eric wore dresses that were similar in cut, but thankfully one was gray and one was dark green. They had also done their makeup and hair differently, so they didn't look like clones anymore. Looking at them side by side like that, you can see the differences. Lisa's mouth is a little wider, Eric's cheekbones are a little higher, Lisa is a little taller. Their eyes are both hazel, but look completely different up close. Still, even if they aren't quite identical, I'm not sure I could tell them apart if they weren't right next to each other. Anyway, they sat next to each other and spent the dinner chatting and laughing with each other. This time, Lisa and Eric tried to include me a little in the conversation, but I continued to spend the entire time frozen in shock and dread. We got back to the room half an hour ago. I told Lisa that I loved her as a unique human being. I reminded her how different she'd looked when we started dating. I listed out several things about herself that I was 100% certain weren't true about Eric, and I painfully admitted that while I did still have some feelings for Eric, it was more a memory of my first love than it was anything real in the here and now that she'd broken my heart. At some point in the babbling, Lisa kissed me quiet. She's currently cyberstalking Eric with extreme prejudice, going back through all of law school, including but not focusing on pics with me, but also back to undergrad and pictures of her on her high school hockey team. I'm here, writing this. There's one more full day of this and then we leave early the next morning. I still have no idea what's going on, but I figure it'll get better once we're gone. If nothing else, med school starts again in 2 weeks, and hopefully she'll be too busy to keep, I don't even know, thinking, doing? I want to call someone to ask for advice, but I have no idea who to call.